Good morning. My name is Hans Kandel. I'm going to present today about dry bean production. In North Dakota, we have several options for crop production. And on this graph, we see edible beans, sunflower, flax, and field pea, and the number of acres that were planted in the last 4 years. So in 2021, we see on the left bar under the edible bean that there was about 650,000 acres planted of dry bean. In our region in North Dakota, we basically grow 3 types: the Pinto, the black, and the navy. And here over time, we see the graph of the number of acres planted, and definitely Pinto is the dominant, and black and navy are the two kind of flip-flopping which one is the most dominant cultivar. Every year we are doing a survey amongst the North Harvest growers and ask about several agronomy questions and issues. And here I want to point out that the question was, what was the issue with excess water? Now, I know in 2021, we didn't have excess water, we have dry conditions. I will come back to it in a second because I'm going to compare here 2012, which was a dry season, very limited acres were affected by excess water, whereas in 2019, we have excess water in about 30% of the cases. So what I've done here is looking at North Dakota Pinto bean yields. These are state yields. So this is the average in the state. And we see on the left pounds per acre, and each dot represents the yields in a given year. The red line kind of gives the trend line. I'm going to point out the one where it was very wet in 2019 and one 2012 where it was dry. And as you can see, the dry was above the trend line, that is the red line, and the wet was below the trend line. So in other words, if we have a dry year, but we do have soil moisture, then we can have a good yield potential. Now also this graph is showing that the wet conditions in 2019 is under that trend. I'm looking here at the trend line and also at the formula. And based on the formula, we see that 19.2, we can come to the conclusion that there has been a yearly increase in productivity of about 19 pounds per acre. This is due to increased genetics, better genetics, but also in better product handling on the part of all the producers from seeding to harvest. Now here I am including one more point, and that is the point, this is kind of the anticipated yield, about a little bit over 900 pounds is expected as the average yield. Those were estimates. The yield may be still a little bit different, but as you can see, it is a lot below the trend line. Now I mentioned earlier that if we have dry years, but we have soil moisture, we can achieve good yields. But in this past year, we were under drought conditions and we had limited available water, and that is why we anticipate one of the lowest Pinto yields in years. So I did this year a study where we had 2 planting dates, and we used a Pinto variety trial. And here the first planted was on May 18th. So here is an overview from that study. On the left, planted on May 18th, and on the right, planted on May the 26th. Normally, if we plant in an earlier part of the season, we see oftentimes a little bit of a yield advantage. Now, what happened this year is that when I planted the first date on the 18th of May, we planted into dry dirt. We were anticipating some rainfall after planting, but it was very dry. So the first part of May and the whole winter had been dry, so there was very limited soil available moisture in that rooting zone. So the seed was planted into the dirt, it had to wait. The second planting date, as you can see, took place when the top was already moist from that rainfall that took place after the first planting, and we saw a better emergence. So I had 6 treatments, and I've got 2 bars here. The first blue bar is the plant population as we counted it, blue first planting date, red second planting date. Now to kind of summarize this one, on the left we have the plants per acre. The established stand for first planting was a lot lower than the second planting date. So in this case, what I wanted to show you is that because of the dry conditions, some of that seed did not actually germinate. Whereas we planted into better conditions, although it was 2 weeks later, the plants germinated and did better. So pay attention to the difference in population from 90,000 to slightly under 85,000. That was the difference. So here is a picture later in the season where between the red bars you see in the main frame the first planted, then the red bars indicate the soybean that was in between the two, and on the right you see the second planting date. So here I'm looking now at the yield. The first planting date was in the blue, second in the red, and then the average in the green. I had 6 different treatments, so you will see that there are some differences. But I want to summarize this one and show you that the second planting significantly out-yielded the first planting date. And as I mentioned before, part of that had to do with the difference in stand. So it is important to get a good stand established. This year was very challenging. The next point I want to discuss is talking about variety trials. We every year conduct variety trials, and we report the variety trials in our extension bulletin. The easiest way to do that is to Google NDSU variety trial results, and you will get a link that you click on, and you will find the page that is kind of a screen capture in below. On that page, you will find the trial results on the right, on the top, in a summarized form. That is a booklet that is available also in printed form. So many of the extension officers will have this available. So this summarizes for several locations, and we always recommend to look at trends instead of looking at one location only, and looking at comparisons within the table. Now we always have this LSD value, and that indicates the level between 2 varieties. If it is bigger than the LSD value, we are 95% sure that those differences are real. We have a new tool available too that I want to kind of point you to. That is a variety tool, a selection tool, and it has some other features. So it is easy to find. It is at vt.ag.ndsu.edu. So vt.ag.ndsu.edu. What you find there is an example. So I'm going to show you just an example. On the left is variety trials for several crops. You click on the dry bean, and then you get this particular site. So dry beans clicking, then I selected dry bean in Langdon as an example. We click on that, and then it shows you dry bean in Langdon. In this case, it gives you a few of the background pieces of information. I also want to show that there is a table form that you see in the screen, or you can go to a chart form. So if you click on the chart, you find information in bar charts, and you can have different colors for instance, yield in the first year, yield in the second year, and the third previous year. So you can see that kind of in a color-coded way. In our booklet, we have also some information for the various cultivars. We have the name, where the originator is from, who's the breeder, and who is actually carrying it, and then some information about relative maturity and the type of plant. So one of the things that is a little bit newer is the Pinto slow darkening gene that has been released in some of the varieties. And what that does is it keeps the Pinto bean in a more white form. And in the picture here, you can see two petri dishes with colored beans. The left is with a slow darkening, and a lot of the consumers like the whiter type of Pinto bean. Now, I'm going to show you just an example from Carrington. Here is the data in the variety booklet. And on the top line, you can see that we, of course, give the name of the variety, the maturity in days after planting. Direct harvest indicates what is the estimate of the losses of the beans that could not be harvested. So if it says direct harvest 92%, that means that the researchers estimated that about 8% of the beans might have been lost. Then there is a column with protein, 100 seed weight, as well as the seed yield in pounds per acre. So I'm going to now look at the maturity column, because oftentimes, especially if I compare my work in soybeans, we see a very strong correlation with the maturity and with the yield. Now, in this case, I'm looking at 2020 and 2021 data from Carrington, and I look at maturity days after planting, and I am expressing it as a yield percent of the mean, because the yields in both years were slightly different. To make it even, I put them as the percent of the mean. So each dot is representing a cultivar in the trial, maturing, like say 100 days after planting, and then the dot will give you what the yield was. So the trend line is kind of looking at all the data. In what we would like to see is that we have a high yielding variety. So not only do we have information about maturity, but we also have information about direct harvesting. So that column I'm plotting here as percent beans harvested successfully. So if it was 98% harvested successfully, on the left you can see how many pounds per acre. Now you can see there's a whole group of data on the right part of the graph between 19 and 100%. So the losses were somewhat limited, but you can see that there is definitely a trend that you want to harvest as many of your beans as possible to maximize your yields. Now, just giving a couple of data points for yields. In 2021, I'm looking here at 7 environments. On the bottom, the environments, and we see the yields in pounds per acre. The letters on top indicate the significant level. So if between two bars, one letter is the same, that means they are not different. So the first bar, La Paz has A, B, C, and Lariat has a C. They still have one letter the same. That means they are similar. So you can kind of look at some of the bars and see that there is variability within yield. Now, there are 2 that have the gene for slow darkening, that is the palomino, and also the vibrant. So those are specialty beans with that slow darkening gene. Now here is a lot of information from 2019 to 2021, and I'm going to summarize it, so bear with me. So here's the data from 21, 19, and 20, and the 3-year average for several of the Pinto varieties. So I'm going to kind of average them over the 3 years. And here you can see that La Paz was the highest yielding over this period of time. And you can see the different genotypes. We not only test, of course, Pintos, also black beans, and I'm going to summarize some of those. But first to mention that NB Twilight is a kind of a newer bean, and this has uniform dry down like Eclipse. This is slightly earlier than Eclipse. It is upright plant architecture that we really like for direct harvesting. So here, the 2021 black bean over 6 environments. We have Blacktails, Eclipse, Twilight, and Zorro. And I'm going to again summarize the data in the next slide. And here you can see that Eclipse and Twilight are very close in yielding, slightly higher yielding than Blacktails or Zorro. Then, as last slide on the variety trials, this is from 18 environments, Blizzard, Medalist, and T9905, and basically they are similar in yield potential. Now, as I mentioned, we have been asking questions in the North Harvest Bean Grower Survey, and I'm asking here questions about inoculant, because inoculant can help with the fixation of nitrogen. And as you can see here, on average, we have been seeing a slight increase in the utilization of inoculant, which especially in a year when we anticipate that the prices for fertilizer will remain high, maybe this is a way to help the plant to get some more ability to fix nitrogen. So just for your information, there is difference between the different types of beans in how well they can nodulate. So here is the nodules per plant in some of the research we did between Eclipse, a black, Pinto, and a navy, and it was clear that the Pinto had the ability to nodulate a little better than the black and a little better than the navy. So there is difference between the different classes. So if we think about factors that influence variety results, of course, the drought, as we mentioned, if we have no subsoil moisture, the yields are going to be lower. Excess water, on the other hand, also reduces yield. Then, of course, fertility level, we need to have enough fertility in the soil, or we have the use of inoculant. And then one thing that I would like to mention is the salinity level. Now, salinity is expressed in electrical conductivity. If you take a sample, you will get back the soil salinity. And in this graph, we can give an example. If your EC is in that neighborhood of 1, then for beans, we already given up about 80%. So beans, relatively speaking, is a very sensitive crop to salts. Soybeans is also sensitive. The grains, the small grains, are less sensitive. So if you have a salty piece, there may be a yield reduction if you use dried beans on that piece. Now, the other question that we have been asking in the survey is, how many are utilizing tiled ground? So tile has been slowly increasing over time. In the last survey, we found that about 14% of the growers mentioned that they had tile drainage. As an example here, I would show you the edible beans where there is a kind of a black line around the field. They yielded about 2,200 pounds, whereas you can see also areas where there is some drown out and some salt issues. And in those areas, the beans was low yielding. So with tile, we reduce the excess water, and over time, we can also manage some of the salt concentration and reduce the salts and give the beans the advantage of good conditions for their growth. If you have any questions, the easiest is to shoot me off an email. My name is Hans Kandel. My email is mentioned there as well. So I hope this gave you some information about dry beans. Please give me a shout out and ask a question if you need to. So thank you very much for your interest in this talk. So have a great day.